Kim Tae-ho shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The seat was made for aliens, not humans. His legs dangled awkwardly, and the backrest pressed against his spine in all the wrong places. Around him, the classroom buzzed with excited chatter in a dozen different alien languages. The Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences was impressive, but it was not built for people like him. Everything was too big, too small, or shaped completely wrong. The floating workbenches hovered at heights meant for six-armed creatures. The holographic displays showed symbols he barely understood. Even the air smelled strange, a mix of ozone and something that reminded him of burnt metal. "Students, please direct your attention to the front," Professor Velteris announced. Her voice came from a crystalline form that changed colors as she spoke. She looked like a living gemstone with 6 thin arms that moved independently. Each arm ended in delicate fingers that sparkled in the classroom lights. Tae-ho turned to look at his 2 fellow humans. Park So-jin sat to his left, furiously taking notes on everything the professor said. Her notebook was already filled with diagrams and equations that made his head hurt. Lee Dong-woo sat on his right, perfectly straight and alert. His military training showed in everything he did, from the way he sat to how his eyes constantly scanned the room. "Today begins your final project for this course," Professor Veltaris continued. Her crystal body shifted to a bright blue color. "Each of you will design and build a weapon capable of penetrating a Class 7 defensive barrier." The alien students around them immediately perked up. Tae-ho could see excitement in their various faces, tentacles, and energy forms. A tall insectoid creature named Kexanal clicked her mandibles together rapidly, apparently a sign of pleasure in her species. Near the back, a massive rock-like being called Thren began a low rumbling sound that might have been laughter. "You have 72 standard hours," the professor said. "The weapon must be your own design and construction. You may use any materials available in our fabrication laboratory, but you cannot copy existing designs or receive direct assistance from others." Tae-ho felt his stomach drop. 72 hours to build a weapon that could break through military-grade defenses. He barely understood how the material synthesizers worked, let alone how to design something that could punch through energy barriers. "What exactly is a Class 7 barrier?" So-jin whispered to him. Before he could admit he had no idea, an ethereal energy being named Zira floated closer to their group. She had no solid body, just a shifting cloud of purple light that somehow conveyed smugness. "Class 7 barriers protect government buildings and military installations," she said telepathically, her thoughts appearing directly in their minds. "They can absorb energy equivalent to a small nuclear explosion." "Right," Tae-ho muttered. "No pressure." Around the classroom, alien students were already pulling out advanced tablets and beginning to sketch designs. Kexanal's 6 arms moved in perfect coordination as she drew what looked like a complex crystalline structure. Her compound eyes focused on multiple parts of the design at once. Thren slowly began carving patterns into a small piece of metal with one massive finger, each line precise despite his enormous size. The professor activated a holographic display that showed a shimmering energy field. "This is what you must penetrate," she said. "The barrier uses a matrix of interlocking energy patterns to disperse incoming attacks. Most conventional weapons simply feed more power into the field, making it stronger." Tae-ho stared at the display and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The barrier looked like a soap bubble made of light, but the readings showed it was incredibly complex. Energy patterns flowed across its surface in mathematical spirals that hurt to look at. "The key," Professor Veltaris continued, "is efficiency. Your weapon must deliver maximum force while using minimal energy. Elegance and innovation will be rewarded." The class began to disperse toward the workshop area. Massive fabrication machines lined the walls, each one capable of creating materials that did not exist naturally. Holographic interfaces floated beside each machine, waiting for design inputs. The whole setup looked like something from a dream, or a nightmare depending on how you felt about advanced alien technology. Tae-ho approached one of the machines and stared at its interface. The controls were labeled in Galactic Standard, which he could read, but the options made no sense. Crystalline matrices, quantum resonators, plasma conduits. It might as well have been magic. Having trouble? Kexnel asked, walking up beside him. Her voice came from a translator device clipped to her thorax. These fabricators are quite simple once you understand the basic principles. Basic principles, Tejo repeated weakly. Kexnel's compound eyes shifted to study him. You begin with your desired energy output, then calculate the optimal focal array configuration. From there you can determine the required crystalline structure and plasma flow patterns. She spoke as if explaining how to tie shoes. Right, Tejo said. Energy output, got it. The insectoid creature tilted her head in what might have been confusion, then moved on to claim a fabrication station. Within minutes, she had the machine humming and producing small crystalline components that fit together like puzzle pieces. Across the workshop, other students were making similar progress. Thren had somehow convinced a fabricator to produce a chunk of incredibly dense metal that he was slowly shaping by hand. Another student, a tentacled creature from the water worlds, was creating what looked like a living weapon that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Sojin appeared at Taiho's shoulder. I think I understand the theory, she said, holding up her notebook. The barrier works by dispersing energy across its entire surface. If we could focus our attack on a single point. That's what they're all trying to do, Dongwu said, joining them. Look around. Every design is about concentrating force. He was right. Despite their different approaches, all the alien students were working toward the same goal, finding ways to punch through the barrier with focused attacks. Their solutions were sophisticated and elegant, exactly what the professor had asked for. So what do we do? Tejo asked. We can't compete with this. Look at what they're building. Kexnel's weapon was taking shape as a delicate crystalline sculpture that somehow contained swirling energy. Zira had manifested a sphere of pure thought that made the air shimmer around it. Even the slug-like creature in the corner was producing something that defied easy description. We do our best, Sojin said firmly. We're here to learn, not to win. Speak for yourself, Dongwu muttered, but he was already studying the fabricator interface with military focus. Tejo turned back to his machine and tried to input a simple design, anything that might work. The interface beeped unhelpfully and displayed error messages in 3 languages. He tried again with the same result. Behind him, alien students chatted excitedly about plasma configurations and quantum entanglement. Professor Veltaris moved between workstations, her crystalline form shifting colors as she observed each project with obvious approval. None of them looked at the 3 humans struggling with machines they barely understood. None of them seemed concerned about the competition. That, Tejo thought grimly, was probably smart. 48 hours remained and Tejo was ready to give up. His latest attempt sat on the workbench like a sad metal sculpture. It was supposed to be a kinetic projectile launcher, but the energy coupling had failed spectacularly during testing. Smoke still rose from the melted components. The fabricator had actually made a disappointed beeping sound when the test results came back. Around him, his alien classmates were making incredible progress. Kexnel's weapon now resembled a piece of art, all flowing curves and crystalline, edges that hummed with contained energy. When she tested it, beams of focused light danced across the workshop walls. The targeting system tracked moving objects with impossible precision. Thren's massive hands had shaped his chunk of metal into something that looked ancient and powerful. Strange symbols covered its surface, each one carved with mathematical precision. When he activated it, the air around the weapon seemed to bend and twist. Gravity itself appeared to be obeying his commands. How is your project progressing? Professor Veltaris asked, approaching the human workstation. Her crystalline form had shifted to a gentle green color that probably meant encouragement. Great, Tejo lied. Just working out some minor details. The professor's color shifted slightly. She could probably tell he was not being truthful. But she simply nodded and moved on to check on other students. Sojin looked up from her notebook where she had been scribbling equations for hours. I think I understand the problem, she said. The barrier uses interference patterns to cancel, Out incoming energy. But the math is incredibly complex. Can you solve it? Dongwu asked. He had been studying the barrier specifications, trying to find weaknesses that could be exploited. Maybe, Sojin said. But even if I figure out the perfect frequency to disrupt the field, we still need to actually build something that can generate it, and I have no idea how to use these machines. Dongwu had been having similar problems. His tactical analysis was solid. He had identified several potential weak points in typical barrier deployments, but knowing where to hit something and actually being able to hit it were very different problems. What about a simple projectile? He suggested. Something fast and heavy? Taeho gestured at his failed launcher. I tried. The power requirements are enormous and I can't figure out how to store enough energy in the capacitors. The fabricator keeps giving me error messages, Sojin added. I think we're asking for things that are either impossible or require materials we don't understand. They worked in frustrated silence for another hour. Every approach they tried ran into the same problem. They simply did not have the knowledge to work with alien technology at this level. The fabricators could create almost anything, but only if you knew exactly what to ask for. Kexnal's weapon made a pleasant chiming sound as she ran another test. The energy beam struck a practice target and left a perfectly circular hole. She adjusted something on the crystalline surface, and the next shot was even more precise. Elegant solution, commented Zira, floating over to examine the insectoid's work. The harmonic resonance should easily disrupt the barrier's matrix. Thank you, Kexanal replied, though I am still optimizing the power transfer efficiency, Taeho. Tried not to listen. Every casual comment from his alien classmates reminded him how far behind he was. They spoke about energy harmonics and quantum matrices the way he might discuss changing a tire. Time for a break, Sojin announced, pushing her notebook away. My brain hurts. They left the workshop and headed for the cafeteria. The academy's food service was designed to accommodate dozens of different species, which meant the selection was both fascinating and slightly horrifying. Taeho stuck to items that looked familiar and probably would not poison him. Maybe we're approaching this wrong, Dongwu said as they sat down at a table designed for beings with too many legs. Everyone else is trying to build something sophisticated. What if we went simple? How simple? Sojin asked. I don't know. A big hammer? Taeho almost smiled. The fabricators won't let us make anything that straightforward. I tried to design a basic projectile, and it kept asking about plasma flows and crystalline matrices. Because that is how weapons work, said a voice behind them. They turned to see Thren approaching their table. His massive stone form moved slowly but purposefully. You cannot simply throw rocks at energy barriers. Why not? Dongwu asked. Thren's rocky features shifted in what might have been surprise. Because that is not how modern weapons function. You need sophisticated energy systems, precision targeting, harmonic disruption patterns. But why? Taeho pressed. What if rocks worked? They do not work, Thren said firmly. My people tried such methods long ago. Simple kinetic weapons are ineffective against advanced defenses. The massive alien moved away, but his words stuck with Taeho. Everyone seemed absolutely certain that simple solutions would not work, but nobody seemed to have tested that assumption recently. Back in the workshop, Taeho stared at the fabricator interface again. Maybe the problem was not his understanding of alien technology. Maybe the problem was trying to use alien technology at all. He started browsing through the basic materials catalog instead of the weapon systems. Steel was available. So was aluminum, titanium, and various dense metals he did not recognize. The fabricator could shape them into simple forms without requiring complex energy systems. What are you doing? Sojin asked, looking over his shoulder. Making something simple, Taeho replied. Really simple. He input a request for a basic metal rod. The fabricator hummed for a moment, then produced exactly what he had asked for. A straight piece of steel about as long as his arm. No energy, systems, no crystalline matrices, no quantum anything. That's not a weapon, Zira commented, floating over to observe. Her energy form flickered with what might have been amusement. "That is merely a metal stick." "I know," Tejo said. He hefted the rod, testing its weight and balance. It was heavier than he had expected but felt solid in his hands. The surface was smooth and polished, tapering to a point at one end. "You cannot be serious," Kexnel said, looking up from her own project. "A simple spear against a Class 7 barrier?" "Why not?" Tejo asked. "Because the mathematics are impossible," she replied. "The energy requirements alone would be enormous, and you would need perfect accuracy, perfect timing, perfect force application. Plus you'd have to throw it really hard," Sojin added. Tejo looked at the rod in his hands. Everyone was right, of course. A simple spear could not possibly work against advanced alien defenses. The idea was ridiculous. But as he sat in his uncomfortable chair, looking at all the sophisticated alien weapons taking shape around him, a strange thought occurred to him. What if everyone was wrong? What if the solution was not more complex but simpler? The chair creaked under him as he shifted position. Like everything else in this place, it was not designed for humans. The legs were uneven, the balance was wrong, and the joints felt loose. Sometimes, he thought, the simplest things broke in the most interesting ways. 12 hours remained when everything changed. Tejo had been sitting in his uncomfortable chair for what felt like days, staring at the metal rod he had made. Around him, his alien classmates put finishing touches on their incredible weapons. Kexnel's crystalline device now projected holographic targeting displays. Thren's gravity hammer made small objects orbit around it like planets around a sun. Zira's pure thought weapon had become a sphere of contained lightning that hurt to look at directly. His metal rod just sat there, being a rod. "This is hopeless," Sojin said, dropping into the chair next to him. Her notebook was filled with calculations that led nowhere. "I can't figure out the barrier's resonance frequency. Every time I think I have it, the math goes crazy." "At least you understand the math," Dongwu replied. He had been studying barrier placement strategies, but without a weapon to place, it felt pointless. "I know exactly where to hit it. I just don't know what to hit it with." Tejo nodded absently. His frustration had been building for hours. Nothing they tried worked. Every solution required knowledge they did not have, or technology they could not use. The fabricators seemed designed to make everything except what they actually needed. He shifted in his chair again, trying to find a comfortable position. The seat was too low, the back was too straight, and the whole thing wobbled whenever he moved. Whoever designed Academy furniture had clearly never seen a human being. "You know what I hate about this place?" he said suddenly. "Everything is overcomplicated. The chairs, the machines, the weapons, everything. Why can't anything just be simple?" "Because simple doesn't work," Kexnal called out from her workstation. "Advanced problems require advanced solutions." Tejo stood up forcefully, fed up with the uncomfortable seat. The chair rocked backward, balancing on its rear legs for a moment before. The stress became too much. One of the front legs snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the workshop. The sound cut through all conversation. Every alien in the room turned to stare at him. Professor Velteris's crystalline form shifted to a concerned orange color. "Oh, sorry," Tejo said quickly. "I'll pay for it." "Are you injured?" the professor asked. "No, just frustrated." He bent down to pick up the broken chair leg. It was about the length of his forearm, made of solid metal, and came to a sharp point where it had snapped off from the seat. The weight felt familiar in his hand. The balance was actually quite good. The sharp end could definitely hurt someone if thrown hard enough. "Wait," he said quietly. Everyone was still staring at him. Sojin looked embarrassed. Dongwu seemed alert, like he sensed something important happening. The alien students appeared confused by the whole incident. "This is a spear," Tejo said, holding up the broken chair leg. "It's garbage," Zira commented telepathically. "Broken furniture." "No," Tejo said, his voice getting stronger. "This is a spear. A really good spear." He hefted it again, testing the balance. The metal was dense but not too heavy. The sharp point was perfectly positioned. The grip area felt right in his hand. "You cannot be serious," Kexenal said. A piece of broken furniture against a military-grade energy barrier? Why not? Tejo asked. What exactly is that barrier designed to stop? Energy weapons, Thren rumbled. Plasma beams, particle accelerators, quantum disruptors. Right. Energy weapons. Tejo pointed the chair leg at an imaginary target. What about non-energy weapons? Such as? Professor Veltaris asked. Her color had shifted to curious purple. Such as a really sharp stick thrown really hard. The workshop fell silent. Every alien student was staring at him like he had suggested attacking the barrier with harsh language. The energy requirements would be enormous, Kexenal protested. To generate sufficient velocity for barrier penetration would require... Would require what? Sojin interrupted. She was looking at Tejo with sudden understanding. How much energy does it take to throw something? Minimal, Dongwu said slowly. Compared to generating plasma or bending spacetime, throwing something is basically free. But the precision required, Thren argued. The targeting calculations, the force vectors. I can aim, Tejo said simply. I've been throwing things my entire life. Zira's energy form flickered rapidly. This is primitive thinking. Barbaric. You cannot solve advanced problems with Stone Age methods. Watch me, Tejo replied. He moved to one of the fabrication stations and began modifying his broken chair leg. The machine could add weight to the back end for better balance. It could sharpen the point to an incredibly fine edge. It could even add grip tape to prevent slipping. What are you doing? Professor Veltaris asked, floating over to observe. I'm making a lance, Tejo said. The simplest possible weapon, a sharp stick. But the barrier is designed to stop energy weapons, he finished. You said so yourself. It disperses incoming energy across its surface. But what if there's no energy to disperse? So Jin grabbed her notebook and started scribbling. Calculations. Kinetic energy is different from electromagnetic energy, she muttered. The barrier's dispersion matrix might not... Wait, she looked up with wide eyes. What if it can't disperse kinetic force? That is impossible, Kexenal declared. Modern defensive systems account for all attack vectors. Do they? Dongwu asked. When was the last time anyone attacked an energy barrier with a spear? The aliens exchanged glances. None of them seemed to have an answer. This is ridiculous, Zira announced. Even if your primitive projectile could somehow penetrate the barrier, you would need perfect accuracy, one shot, at extreme range, with no guidance systems. Tejo finished his modifications and hefted the completed lance. It was heavier now, better balanced, with a point sharp enough to cut. It felt deadly in his hands. I can hit what I aim at, he said confidently. Prove it, Kexenal challenged. Professor Veltaris moved to activate a practice target at the far end of the workshop. It was a small disc about the size of a dinner plate, hovering 30 feet away. If you can hit that target consistently, I will allow you to test your weapon against the barrier. Tejo took a position at the throwing line. The target looked small from this distance, but not impossibly small. He had thrown plenty of things much farther with less accuracy. Drew back his arm and threw. The lance flew straight and true, punching through the center of the target with a satisfying metallic clang. The target spun wildly before falling to the floor. The workshop was completely silent. Again, Kexenal demanded. Professor Veltaris activated another target. Tejo retrieved his lance and threw again. Another perfect hit. After the fifth consecutive bullseye, the alien student stopped asking for more demonstrations. I do not understand, Thren said slowly. How do you calculate trajectory without computers? Practice, Tejo replied. Lots and lots of practice. But the variables, Kexenal protested. Air resistance, gravitational effects, target movement. I eyeball it, Tejo said. The concept of eyeballing it seemed to break something in Kexenal's precise mind. Her compound eyes began focusing and unfocusing rapidly. Professor Veltaris's crystal form had shifted to a color none of them had seen before. Deep blue shot through with silver threads. This is fascinating, she said. A completely intuitive targeting system based on biological neural networks rather than computational analysis. I just throw things good, Taeho said. Yes, the professor replied. Yes, you do. The testing chamber was impressive in a way that made Taeho's stomach hurt. The room was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, with energy barriers, force fields, and measurement devices covering every surface. Holographic displays showed power readings, structural analysis data, and threat assessment calculations in real time. At the far end of the chamber, the Class 7 barrier shimmered like a soap bubble made of light. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A perfect dome of energy that could stop a nuclear explosion. The air around it seemed to bend and twist as the barrier's field generators maintained their precise energy patterns. Students will demonstrate their weapons in order of project complexity, Professor Veltaris announced. Her crystalline form had shifted to a formal gold color for the testing ceremony. We will begin with the most sophisticated designs. The alien students arranged themselves in a line according to some hierarchy Taeho did not understand. Kexanal was first, her crystalline weapon humming with contained energy. Thren came next, his massive gravity hammer making the floor vibrate slightly. Other students followed with devices that seemed to defy physics, floating orbs of light, writhing mechanical tentacles, and things that hurt to look at directly. Taeho found himself at the very end of the line, holding his modified chair leg. Sojin and Dongwoo stood beside him for moral support, though they looked as nervous as he felt. This is it, Sojin whispered. Last chance to back out and pretend this was all a joke. No backing out, Taeho replied, though his hands were sweating. We've come this far. Kexnal stepped up to the firing line. Her weapon looked even more impressive in the testing chamber's bright lights. Crystalline arrays focused energy into complex patterns while holographic targeting systems painted the barrier with precision markers. Engaging target, she announced. The weapon fired with a sound like glass singing. A beam of pure energy lanced across the chamber and struck the barrier dead center. The impact created cascading interference patterns that rippled across the barrier's surface like waves on a pond. For a moment, it looked like the beam might punch through. Then the barrier's dispersal matrix activated. The energy beam scattered into a dozen smaller beams that spread across the barrier's surface before being absorbed harmlessly. The barrier flickered, but held firm. The measurement devices displayed their readings. Impressive, Professor Veltaris commented. 73% energy transfer efficiency. The barrier experienced significant stress, but maintained structural integrity. Kexnal looked disappointed, but unsurprised. The dispersion rate was higher than calculated, she said. I should have accounted for secondary harmonic resonance. Thren stepped up next. His gravity hammer did not look like much, just a chunk of carved metal covered in strange symbols. But when he activated it, the air in the testing chamber seemed to thicken. Small objects began floating toward the weapon as if drawn by invisible strings. Warning, the chamber's safety systems announced. Gravitational anomaly detected. Thren swung his hammer in a slow, deliberate arc. The gravitational field around the weapon compressed into a focused wave that struck the barrier with tremendous force. For a moment, the barrier's perfect sphere, shape distorted into something that looked almost egg-like. But again, the barrier held. The gravitational wave spread across its surface and dissipated into space. The measurement devices recorded even higher stress levels, but no actual penetration. Excellent work, Professor Veltaris said. 81% force transfer. Your gravitational manipulation was particularly elegant. One by one, the alien students demonstrated their weapons. Each design was more sophisticated than the last. Energy beams that shifted frequency mid-flight to confuse the barrier's sensors. Particle accelerators that fired streams of exotic matter. Weapons that seemed to attack the barrier's control systems rather than the barrier itself. All of them failed. Each weapon managed to stress the barrier, some quite significantly. But the Class 7 defensive field had been designed by the galaxy's best military engineers specifically to stop exactly these kinds of attacks. Energy weapons, particle beams, gravitational effects. The barrier had countermeasures for all of them. Finally, only Tejo remained. And now, Professor Velteris announced, we have an unusual entry. Student Kim Tejo has chosen to test a kinetic projectile weapon of his own design. A murmur went through the small audience of alien students. Several of them made sounds that might have been polite laughter. Zira's energy form flickered with what was definitely amusement. A spear, Kexnel commented loudly. He is going to throw a spear at a military-grade energy barrier. It's a lance, Tejo corrected, stepping up to the throwing line. His weapon looked pathetically simple compared to the alien designs. Just a pointed metal rod with some weight added to the back end. The barrier waited at the far end of the chamber, still shimmering with perfect confidence. It had stopped everything thrown at it so far without even flickering. Energy readings showed it was operating at less than 10% capacity. Begin when ready, Professor Veltaris said. Tejo hefted his lance and took aim. The barrier was a big target, but it was also very far away, farther than he had ever thrown anything in his life. The weight distribution felt right, though. The balance was perfect. Behind him, he could hear alien students whispering to each other in their various languages. He caught fragments of translation. Primitive. Impossible. Waste of time. You can do this, Sojin whispered. Hit it hard, Dongwu added. Tejo drew back his arm. The lance felt solid in his grip, like an extension of his own body. He had thrown thousands of things over the years. Baseballs, footballs, rocks, sticks, paper airplanes. This was just another throw, a really, really important throw. He released the lance with every ounce of strength he possessed. The metal rod flew across the testing chamber in a perfect arc. It did not glow with energy or warp space-time around itself. It did not have targeting systems or guidance computers. It was just a pointed piece of metal moving very fast. It struck the barrier at the exact center with a sound like breaking glass. For a split second, nothing happened. The lance seemed to hang in the air, pressing against the energy field. The barrier's surface rippled around the point of impact. Then the lance punched straight through. The barrier collapsed instantly. The perfect dome of energy simply vanished as if it had never existed. Warning alarms began blaring throughout the testing chamber. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. The lance clattered against the far wall and fell to the floor with a metallic ring that echoed in the sudden silence. What? Kexnel said very quietly. Just happened? Professor Velteris's crystalline form was cycling through colors so rapidly it looked like a rainbow having a seizure. The barrier has failed, she announced unnecessarily. Complete structural collapse. No energy dispersion detected. How? Thren demanded. His rocky voice sounded genuinely confused. How did a simple projectile penetrate a Class 7 barrier when our weapons could not? Tejo was wondering the same thing. He had expected his lance to bounce off harmlessly, maybe with some impressive sparks. He had not expected to actually win. The kinetic energy readings are... Professor Veltaris paused, apparently checking her measurements multiple times. Minimal, far below the barrier's rated threshold for physical impacts. Then why did it work? Sojin asked. The professor's form settled into a deep purple color that probably indicated deep thought. I believe, she said slowly, we may need to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about barrier technology. Around the chamber, alien students stared at the broken barrier and then at Tejo's simple lance. Their sophisticated weapons hummed, quietly, suddenly looking very complicated and very ineffective. Did I pass? Tejo asked. Professor Veltaris made a sound like crystal chimes, laughing. Oh yes, she said. You definitely passed. The workshop had become a very different place after the testing. Alien students who had barely acknowledged the humans before were now crowding around Tejo's workstation, all talking at once in their various languages. The universal translator was working overtime to keep up with the flood of questions. Explain the targeting calculation, Kexnal demanded for the 5th time. What computational method did you use to determine the optimal impact trajectory? I looked at it and threw. Taeho replied also for the 5th time. That is not an explanation, she protested. There must be underlying mathematical principles. There are, Sojin said, coming to his rescue with her notebook. Human brains are incredibly good at calculating projectile paths. We just do it. Unconsciously. Unconsciously? Thren's rocky features shifted in confusion. How do you solve differential equations unconsciously? The same way you breathe unconsciously, Dongwu answered. Millions of years of evolution taught us how to throw things accurately. We don't think about it any more than you think about gravity. Professor Velteris had spent the last hour running simulations and reviewing barrier specifications. Her crystalline form kept shifting colors as she processed the data. Finally, she called for attention. Students, I believe I can explain what happened during the test, she announced. Please observe. A holographic display showed the barrier's energy matrix, the complex pattern of interlocking fields that made it so effective against energy weapons. Class 7 barriers are designed to detect and disperse incoming energy attacks, she explained. The system identifies energy signatures and automatically adjusts the field matrix to distribute that energy harmlessly across the barrier's entire surface. The display showed examples of different energy weapons striking the barrier. In each case, the incoming attack was absorbed and scattered. However, Professor Veltaris continued, the barrier's sensors are calibrated to detect energy weapons, plasma beams, particle accelerators, gravitational distortions. All of these create distinctive energy signatures that trigger the barrier's defensive response. And kinetic projectiles? Sojin asked. Do not register as weapons at all, the professor replied. Student Taeho's lance generated no energy signature. To the barrier's sensors, it was simply a piece of debris, something to be ignored rather than defended against. Zira's energy form flickered rapidly. That cannot be correct. Physical projectiles should trigger impact sensors. They do, Professor Veltaris said, but only above a certain threshold. The barrier is designed to ignore small objects, dust, meteorites, random debris. Student Taeho's lance fell below that threshold. But it still broke the barrier, Kexnel pointed out. Because barriers are not solid walls, the professor explained. They are energy fields. When something passes through them at the right angle and velocity, the field cannot compensate quickly enough to stop it. A new simulation showed Taeho's lance striking the barrier. Unlike the energy weapons, which spread their force across the entire surface, the lance concentrated all its kinetic energy on a single point. The barrier's field generators tried to compensate, but they were too slow. It's like popping a balloon with a needle, Sojin said suddenly. The balloon can hold a lot of pressure, but a sharp point in the right place. Exactly, Professor, Veltaris said. The barrier could absorb the total kinetic energy of the lance easily, but it could not redistribute that energy fast enough to prevent local failure. So the simplicity was actually an advantage, Dongwu said. The simplicity was everything, the professor corrected. Complex weapons generate complex signatures that trigger complex defenses. Simple weapons generate simple signatures that are ignored by those same defenses. Thren slowly processed this information. You are saying that we have been trying too hard. I am saying that you have been trying to solve the wrong problem, Professor Veltaris replied. You assumed the barrier needed to be overpowered or outmaneuvered. Student Taeho found a way to be ignored instead. The alien students exchanged glances. This concept seemed to be challenging some fundamental assumptions about how problems should be solved. But this approach is so, Kexnel struggled for words, so primitive. So? Taeho asked. It worked. That is precisely the point, Professor Veltaris said. Effectiveness matters more than elegance. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the wrong solution. She activated another display showing various historical conflicts. This pattern repeats throughout galactic history. Advanced civilizations develop complex defenses against complex threats. Then someone finds a simple solution that renders those defenses useless. Like using wooden ships against sensor networks, Dongwu said. or radio communication against quantum encryption, or throwing spears at energy barriers, Taeho added. Lances, Sojin corrected with a grin. The workshop fell quiet as everyone absorbed the lesson. The alien students looked at their sophisticated weapons with new uncertainty. Devices that had seemed incredibly advanced an hour ago now felt somehow inadequate. So, what do we do now? Asked one of the tentacled students. Do we abandon energy weapons entirely? Of course not, Professor Veltaris replied. But perhaps we should not abandon simple solutions either. Student Tai-Ho has reminded us that sometimes the most direct approach is the most effective approach. Just threw a stick at it, Taeho protested. Yes, the professor said. And that is exactly why it worked. Kexnal approached Taeho's workstation and examined his lance carefully. May I ask you something? Sure. When you broke the chair leg, did you immediately think of it as a weapon? Taeho considered the question. Not immediately, but pretty quickly, yeah. It was the right size, the right weight, sharp on one end. You saw a weapon where we saw garbage, she said wonderfully. Your mind processes problems differently than ours. Maybe, Taeho said. Or maybe you just think too much. Perhaps both, Kexnal replied. Would you be willing to teach me about this eyeballing technique? I don't think it can be taught, Sojin said. It's more about instinct than knowledge. Then teach me about instinct, Kexnal said. I am very good at learning. Soon other students were asking similar questions. How do you aim without computers? How do you calculate without equations? How do you solve problems without overthinking them? Taeho tried his best to explain, but it was difficult to describe something he had never really thought about. Throwing things accurately was just something humans did, like walking or breathing. As the workshop session ended, Professor Veltaris gathered the three humans together. I want to thank you, she said. Today's lesson was valuable for all of us. We didn't do anything special, Sojin said. That is what made it special, the professor replied. You approached the problem without preconceptions. You were not trapped by conventional thinking. We were just desperate, Taeho admitted. Desperation can be a powerful motivator, Professor Veltaris agreed. It forces you to consider options that would otherwise seem impossible. As they left the academy that day, maintenance crews were already installing new barrier systems in the testing chamber. The specifications had been updated to include kinetic impact sensors with much lower thresholds. I bet they'll design barriers specifically to stop spears now, Dongwu said. Probably, Taeho agreed. Which means we'll have to find something even simpler next time. Like what? Sojin asked. Taeho grinned. I don't know. Maybe we could try throwing rocks. Behind them, the academy's workshops hummed with activity, as alien students began experimenting with simpler solutions. Not all of them would work, but some might. And that, Professor Veltaris reflected, was exactly the point. Sometimes the best way forward was backward. Sometimes the newest solution was the oldest one. And sometimes all you needed was a sharp stick and the confidence to throw it really hard. In her office that evening, Professor Veltaris began revising her curriculum. The new course would be called Alternative Problem-Solving Methods and would focus on simple, direct approaches to complex challenges. The first assignment would be building a weapon capable of penetrating the Academy's new and improved Class 8 barriers. She had a feeling the human students would surprise everyone again.